So UAT, user acceptance testing. So I know there's a lot of developers around. You'll be glad to know I have a very good relationship with our developers. I find it's the best way, quite frankly, when I have to go back to them with defects and politely say to them that, oh, you know, it's not quite working as we're expecting, even though it's got through various other stages. So as Anna explained, I'm nearly 18 months or so now, I've been in Vodafone. I've been in testing probably 10, 11 years all told. And Vodafone, I've worked in lots of other companies, and you say the name and people kind of look at you, but you say Vodafone, everyone's heard of Vodafone. Or hopefully they have. And hopefully they've had good experiences as well. Now, Vodafone is a very complicated company, believe me. I have not got my head around it at all. There's Vodafone Group, which is the bit I work in, and Vodafone UK. Now, in Vodafone Group, I'm in Vodafone Business, and we don't deal with the individual customers. It's the big companies, the big corporates. They're our customers. And I actually look after, say, the UAT team, and we have internal customers who then obviously service the big clients. Now, even in my own team, and various other people say, Sarah, I don't really understand UAT. I don't really get it. So I always tell them, I always start by saying, well, testing is, testing, really challenging. A bit like today when I decided, stupidly, I thought, to have the chicken noodles for lunch and thought I'll end up wearing it. But anyway, so that's where I usually start, is testing, is a challenge. The data, getting the people to actually do the testing with you. So I thought I'd start by way of introduction to give you a bit of an idea of my background. This is what you won't find on LinkedIn, well, the first bit anyway. So I started out as the top right corner. I was actually brought up, I came from England, southern part of England, in a very small village. And my parents actually ran and owned the village shop. So you can imagine it was the hub, the central part of the village life. And everyone came in, they shared their, problems and asked my parents for advice. And it always seemed to me that, my parents never minded if someone just came in for a loaf of bread a month or whether they actually got all their shopping from them. And it was all about the customer experience, or as we would look at it, the user experience. And the customer was really at the heart for my parents, even as much as they'd actually offer, I say it was a small village, and they'd even offer this free delivery service. So they'd sort of load up the family car with the pre-ordered groceries. Now, this is not like with Amazon where, you just do it online and so on. This was people phoning up, placing their order. My parents, at the end of a busy day, about 6 o'clock in the evening, they shut the shop, load up the car with these, and off they go. Now, even in the winter, occasionally we had the harsh winters, they then load up the sledge, and then they would traipse along in the snow, still delivering, because they thought, regardless of the weather, people relied on them, and that was key to them, the customer. And that was what really made, sort of inbred in me. It was sort of, it was the core of how we were brought up. You always look for others, how you can help them, and actually giving people that good experience. And that kind of lived with me. And right through from various customer-facing roles, whether it was customer service in a pensions department for many years, right through. And now, as we stand here today, as UAT lead in Vodafone. And I say the last 10 or so years, I've actually been in testing. Right from being a test analyst, right through different test manager, and now solely UAT lead. So I only worry about user acceptance testing, which is probably just as well. I am not technical at all. I've never written a line of code. I can just about run a SQL query if someone's written it for me, but that's about the size of it. Dealing with the users, that's my bag. I can do that. Now, recently, a few years ago, a new neighbour I'd met asked me what I did. And I said, oh, just a tester. Now, you might be thinking, Sarah, were you just being very modest? Why just a tester? Bearing in mind, he just told me he was a Scrum Master. How the heck am I going to beat that? That was my idea. I thought very topical, Rugby World Cup. We won't mention Ireland. And it made me think, if this is a Scrum Master, what on earth do people think a tester does? Well, I don't do that, you'd be very glad to know. No test tubes or anything at all. So from our point of view, I work in business, in the Vodafone business, and I actually work in business change team. So I'm not as part of the IT side of it. I'm not in the IT team at all. I'm in the business change team. And what we do, we transform our business. So what we'll hopefully do is try to, when they're transitioning and we're trying to simplify the business for them, we kind of take them on that journey. I hate using that term, but it is what we do. So in this fabulous team I'm part of, we have business change specialists, analysts, and what they do, they might start off with business impact assessments, and they go right through to adoption. They literally do take it from sort of cradle to grave, as it were. And I'm part of that team. So what we tend to try to do in business change is to increase, as it says there, the end user engagement, increase the likelihood of adoption, because at the end of the day, there is no point in trying to deliver anything if no one's using it. So particularly you developers, designers, what I want to be able, what we want to be able to do is all that good work you spent doing. And if you think if your waterfall, you've spent a considerable amount of time and effort and money on it. As it is, we do more agile, and that's UAT and agile was definitely something for another occasion. But you want to make sure that people want to use it, that they're not going to immediately slip into what they've normally done and what they're used to. So that's what we try to do. How they do it is by building relationships with the key stakeholders. So I think earlier on in the day, Tobias was mentioning about the personas, and that's what we do. And there's a lot of collaboration. It is literally right from start to finish, just keeping that communication going. And at the end of it, what we want to achieve is to realise the benefits and improve the stakeholder appetite for future transformation, because you don't want to turn off your operations teams from actually doing anything with you again. So as UAT, what I see is, and I say I do take it very seriously, I'm passionate about UAT, is that we're the gatekeeper. So we get right through the different test phases and we get to UAT and we literally do try to stop anything going through into that into production without finding hopefully all the bugs and the defects. So before we let it go free, I say we will try to capture those. So this is UXDX and UX in UAT. So in Vodafone, the user experience and customer experience is baked into everything we do. It really is. There is even customer experience design thinking courses. And we really, really do, put a lot, a thought into the customer experience. And testing's no exception. Now, from the UAT side of things, I don't use any, I think occasionally, but I tend try not to use any professional testers. It's all people from the business, because ultimately they will actually have that insight, and they will see things that they'll look at it through a lens that you just don't get from a tester, because they just can follow the scripts, but they just don't know that side of it. And what they'll do, we'll do formal and exploratory testing. Now, what I also encourage, which does slightly irritate the management, is for them to look more of the UX, of thinking outside the test, and that's why I encourage the exploratory testing and saying, look, is there any way we can improve this before it goes in? Let's capture that now. So what I will never do, this is one of my quotes, is I will never compromise the quality of testing. As you'll no doubt be well aware, testing timelines, quite often, no matter what happens and what we do, it seems to be the way that testing is always squeezed right at the very, very end, and we end up with a teeny tiny timeline, and we're exposed to suddenly do all the testing that we need, we've planned out in the tiniest thing, and you think, well, this is realistic, unrealistic. We don't want to compromise the quality of that, of what we've built and that by not testing it properly. Even though we might have done various other testing, integration, functional, and so on, we want to make sure that we still have that proper user experience. So what do we do? Well, if I get really, really pushed, then I'll just say, okay, hey, let's not bother. Let's just put it into production. If nothing else, believe me, that is one way to get your program manager's attention, because they often sort of look at you, really? And of course, I don't really mean that. But as I say, it does make you, get their attention and make you realize actually that maybe we do need to be a bit more considerate to the testing side of it. But what could possibly go wrong? Now, you're probably thinking, what on earth has the bus got to do with any of this? And this bus is a little story, I can tell you. A friend of mine told me recently, actually, and it was in a town, and what had happened, they actually built this new bridge, and it was supposed to be for buses and bus lanes in it. But for some reason, the actual buses, they kind of put these tramline things down the sides, and the bus literally just fitted. The wheels were virtually touching if they literally just drove in a straight line. And they kind of tried to deny this, but as ever, you can guarantee people always have a mobile phone. People are always taking pictures, and there were these pictures splashed around the paper about this test that they were doing. So they obviously had to go back to the drawing board and rethink that idea, so hence the bus. But what else could go wrong if you just suddenly actually put it into production without any testing? Well, of course, you could find the code doesn't work as expected. So it's kind of quite a big thing. You might actually find, didn't mean to push that, that you might have a data security breach somehow. So again, quite a big one. The reputation side of it, it's not just the company, the actual overall company reputation you might damage. It might well be that you damage the team, your own, there's lots of different reputations. And there could be a costly cleanup exercise at the end of the day, if you've got to unpick it and so on and so forth. So looking again to the risks. So obviously, once you if you did decide that you wanted to go down that route of popping it into production, then obviously once the code is put into production, surely then it's available to all customers, consumers, unless you've somehow managed to ring fence it. So isn't there a risk that someone could actually inadvertently use it before the testers get to it? That was my thought of how you're going to stop doing that. And how is this different to deploying it without any testing at all, like we've just touched on? So what I want to look at now is give you a couple of examples. One is actually using production data, and that was before you joined Vodafone. And then one more recent example with production. So in the first example, we were looking at using production data. Now, to give you the context, it was within financial services. I was asked if I would go down. I was the UAT lead at that point, or test manager, but I was asked to actually go and help as a test lead on a client site. So we weren't even delivering to ourselves as our company. It was actually to another client. And it was in their BAU, so business as usual program. And typically, when you were doing sort of business as usual, you might have 2 or 3 programs on the go at any one point. And so you just think, well, it's quite a small change. It might be just due to the Finance Act, or some change, whether the company wanted to pay a different bonus, whether it was to actually test correspondence because they've changed branding or something. So you kind of think, well, it's only a small change. How difficult could it be? Well, this particular company was risk-averse apart from anything else, which didn't help. As I said, it's financial services, highly regulated, so externally by the regulators, but also the company itself had their compliance department, security department, really tight on their regulations. It was a system, as being not a very technical person, I refer to as a clunky old system, the ones from years back. It was a pensions system. It was closed book of business. And to add more complexity, it was impossible, so I was led to believe, to actually manually create data. So you couldn't create the test data. So I said, well, how are you expecting us to test this then? What do we do? So it was, well, you're going to have to use production data. Okay. So fine. So, how do I do that then? There's a couple of forms you need to fill out first. Okay, just explaining what you want to do, why you want to do it. So did those forms, and then it was, okay, now what do I do with these? Right, you need agreement from the project sponsor. Fair enough. We did that. So, cool, we get ready to start testing then. No. You there? Oh, is it going to go? No, you then got to pull up this security plan. Right. So the security plan gave details of what testing you wanted to do, who was going to be able to see the data, what you wanted to use exactly it for, how much data you wanted to use. How was I supposed to know? I don't know the book of business, so all of it. Yeah, let's have all of it. It was a smallish book. And more importantly is once you finish with it, the data in your test environment, you had to make sure it was cleared down. Fair enough. So we filled that out, completed it. Okay, so who needs to sign it? Security forum. Right, they meet once a month. How useful is that? Managed to get over that hurdle and thought, yeah, great, we must be ready to start testing now because we filled out the first couple of forms, filled out this great big other document, and all for what? A small bit of testing. But no, we weren't finished yet. So the next thing was, because we needed to test with this, albeit smallish book of business, on all of it, we had to then meet up with the business security, the actual information security manager. And they'll present the pack and go through it, and it was absolutely a nightmare. And you kind of left the feeling literally tied up in knots there. And you remember the first quote I said about testing being tested? Wow. But at that point, we were able to start testing, although you did, let's be honest, you felt a bit exhausted at that point. And thankfully, we were able to successfully test it because we had all the data in there, whatever we needed to do, all the customer journeys, we were able to do. And we obviously had to make sure that we did clear, the right people then cleared down the data. But it was a bit of a headache, by no stretch of the imagination. So I've always, and as I say, and being in financial services at that stage, and I've been there those first 10 years of testing, and we'd never, ever even looked at, say, testing in production, mostly because we were an outsourcing company that I worked for at the time, and so it wasn't our data anyway, it was the client's data. The clients were often adverse to do that, and you can understand it, hence the reason for this particular company. We had to go through all the hoops to actually do that, to just use production data in the environment. Most of the time, they were able to actually either use handcrafted data or actually just manipulate it. So that was just one example where, as I say, it was very, very taxing, to say the least. Now, the next one is more recent example, and this is actually using a production environment. So for this one, it's actually testing reports. So the data itself, and it's an internal customer. So the internal customer is basically within our operations team. So it's one of our business teams, our personas, as we refer to them. And thankfully, we have a very good rapport with them. We've built up a very good engagement. They're really keen to have the solution. It's been a solution they've been wanting for a long time. As I say, with the business change team, my colleagues, they've actually managed to sort of get them on board, bring them on this journey, and thankfully, it's actually paying off for ourselves. So it's an analytical solution. The way we've actually been able to use a production environment is because we can limit it to the type of system we're actually testing or using is with licenses. So we can reduce and we can actually ring fence them to those licenses. And we're actually, it's almost like a soft launch really. And we've kind of run it as a pilot, but it is more of a soft launch to those sort of early adopters to start using it, because we found that actually in the test environment, without having the proper data, they really weren't getting any benefit at all from testing. And so that the decision was made to, look, let's pop it in, because we can't test it otherwise. Then we can get some useful output and some useful insights from that. So that's what we're currently doing. So but to say, it was not taken lightly, and it was with the stakeholders' agreement as well. It's what they wanted to do. So the regulations, it's always a sticky, thorny subject. So it was mentioned earlier on, I think Anna mentioned it, about GDPR, so the General Data Protection Regulation. Now, this further complicates the use of any personal data, and quite rightly, because obviously it protects myself and yourselves as well. But it does place constraints a little bit on what we can do for testing. Now, I'm not going to, especially this time of day, because as I say, it's end of a great 2 days, I'm not going into those or test you on the principles of GDPR. But needs to say that to actually process the data, you need to have a lawful basis for doing so. And it's really kind of grey area how much you can stretch testing to be a lawful processing of that data. So what I've done in the past and what's worked well in the past, but as I say, thankfully, I've always been able to use an environment that's as close as to production, is to use, and this is one thing that GDPR do allow, is to use depersonalized or anonymized data where you're masking it. Although GDPR do stipulate that it has to be if you go into mask it or anonymize it, or obfuscate it, it can't be then reversed. It's got to be one way only. So that's one way of getting around that. Obviously, you don't want to do all data because you might as well handcraft it yourself. So that's a complexity. So what I wanted to leave, so some takeaways really, 3 points to consider if you're looking to test in production or do your UAT validation in production, is your data. So is it, how much is it, is it personal data? How sensitive is it? How restricted? I know with some of our clients, we've got some where they are secure, others where they're restricted, but not quite as secure as the secure ones. And obviously, so it really depends on that kind of data, that you're actually looking at. So as I said, in my second example, it was more reports, so it wasn't like the personal data or corporate data. The next thing is what's your motivation? What is the reason you're looking at it? Is it because of time saving? Is it the fact that, like I was saying before, you get to a stage where you're squeezed and squeezed and squeezed to do UAT, that simply you just think, I've got 2 days, let's just throw it in there. It's probably not a good reason for doing that. Similarly with cost saving, is it just a case of, oh, maybe we don't need to, and that's the other thing as well, is environments. How many times do I have an argument about, yes, I do need another environment, I need a UAT environment, I know you've got ones for various other stages, but yeah, I kind of need one for testing. And then I get told, can't you share it? No, I don't want to share it with the other one. So again, it's that kind of thing. So possibly not the best motivation either. Another interesting point, is it to achieve the outcomes, the conditions, that drive your outcomes? As I said earlier, my first example of using production data, we were able to actually achieve the user journeys by using that production data. So I thought that was probably a good reason for doing it. Is it the fact of the capacity of your production environment versus your test environment? So many times we've found issue where we've, whether it be waterfall, which we've done a lot of in my previous job, but whether it's waterfall or agile, no matter how much you test it, whether it's functional testing, integration testing, UAT, as soon as you go into production, you can sometimes find a problem. And you can never understand why, and you can get the database guys looking at it, and they'll compare and say, well, they're the same. The only thing is the capacity, but everything else, the code's the same, everything. Every tiny other piece is the same. So is it because the fact that you just feel that actually you need to be able to put a lot more of the data, use more data? Another thing is, again, kind of goes with the one above it, before the capacity, is there's no restrictions on customer journeys, because if you've got all the data, you've got it in there, you can run through it, and maybe that's what you want to do. And then lastly, your data consumers. So your customers, like myself, they're internal to us. So they're our internal customers. We're transforming their business to give them better service so they can actually improve what they're doing in day-to-day, which hopefully will have that positive impact on actually serving our own customers. Or is it external customers? Is it the actual general public or whoever your customers are? So that's the 3 things to really consider, other than obviously the regulations. And I think back to when I was saying right at the top of the talk about my parents. And one thing that really stood out as well, as I mentioned, that a lot of people came into the shop, they would share things, you'd never share with anyone you didn't really know. But parents never shared that with anyone. They didn't even share it with us, me and my sisters. We never knew anything. But we just knew people would come in and confide in them. But they always kept that safe, secure, locked away because they wanted to. And that is the thing, I suppose, is another little thing is, do what's right for your customers, and obviously stay within regulations. And that's that was the end of what I wanted to say. So thank you for staying with me.